Hi guys, it's Kaz. It is already July. I cannot quite believe it. So today we're going to be doing the mid-year book freakout tag. Before we begin, I just want to acknowledge that most of the time when I'm filming a video, it's, full comfort on the bottom, but somewhat more put together on top. I am wearing a pajama shirt. It has pandas on it, and it's fluffy. It's happening. We're just going to embrace it. But let's talk books. 2021 has been an interesting year for my reading. Just to give you a bit of an idea of how slumpy it's been, the amount of books I read in January, 1, February, 3, March, 0, April, 2, May, 10, well done, 10 is great, and June, 5. But it's not just been a reading slump, it's been a life slump, and I took a break for a few months because mentally and emotionally I just wasn't able to. The reason why I've been reading so much in May and June is because I've been participating in readathons. And because of the success of those, I've been running my own personal ones. But since I haven't been very active, I'm really excited to be doing this video today because it'll give me a bit of an opportunity to talk about some of the really great books and some maybe not as great books that I've read in 2021. Question 1 is the best book I've read so far in 2021, Cemetery Boys by Aidan Thomas. So in this we follow Yadriel, who is transgender and has a very kind of traditional family, who has a bit of trouble accepting his gender. And so Yadriel is really determined to prove himself as a real brujo and decides to perform this ritual on his own. And essentially he's trying to summon the ghost of his cousin. But things don't quite go according to plan, and he summons Julian Diaz instead, who is the school's kind of resident bad boy and refuses to go quietly into death. And so the two of them agree to kind of help each other and perhaps form a bit deeper of a relationship than they initially expected. If you saw one of my recent reading vlogs where I read this book and showed some of my live reactions, I got quite emotional reading this book in a variety of ways. There was a lot of shock, a lot of upset, devastation, surprise, elation. There was a lot going on, and I feel like the last half of this as well really culminated into a story that was just super powerful. I just adored the characters and all the different relationships that were explored. Obviously romantic relationships, but also platonic. I adored seeing the friendship between Yadriel and his best friend Maritza. But family also plays a huge part in this as well, and there are some kind of complicated relationships and a lot of things that the characters have to deal with individually but also together. So it was an emotional time, but it was just such a satisfying story. It's beautiful. Read Cemetery Boys. Please read Cemetery Boys. The best sequel I've read so far in 2021, Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson. This is the third book in the Stormlight archive, so I'm not going to touch upon what this is about because obviously spoilers, but to kind of summarize the general story that we're introduced to in book 1. It is set on Roshar, which is frequently ravaged by these massive storms. And centuries prior, the Knights Radiant fell, and the Knights Radiant use these really powerful pieces of armor called shard plates and weapons called shard blades. I'm putting these down, they're too heavy. These shard plates and shard blades still remain even though the Knights Radiant no longer are around. And they're essentially highly sought after, and wars have been fought over them. And there is this one war happening on the Shattered Plains. So this war is happening between one of the kingdoms of humanity and this race called the Parshendi, and we follow a few different characters from different walks of life, but that are all kind of affected by this war that's happening on the Shattered Plains. And it's very grand in scale. The UK B format paperbacks have to be split into 2 books because they're just so chunky, but they're brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. There's just so much to talk about with this series that it's hard to know where to begin to summarize my thoughts in a very broad way. So I'll actually leave a few links in the description below to the live shows that I've been a part of. So myself, along with Catherine, Becca and Jade, have been doing a bit of a read along of the Stormlight archives and chatting about them in live shows. So if you want to know a little bit more of my thoughts, I'd recommend checking those out. But the world building, so meticulous, so in depth. There's so much that I am curious about and a lot of rich history throughout the world. And I think Brandon Sanderson has done a brilliant job of developing these interesting and flawed and laid characters. The series is a commitment, but I think so worth it. A new release I haven't read yet but want to. Ace of Spades, which I think has been pitched as like Gossip Girl meets Get Out, which has me very intrigued. It's a contemporary thriller that I've heard so many wonderful things about. I know that Chantel has been absolutely raving about it, and on her recommendation, I ordered myself a copy of Ace of Spades, but it hasn't yet arrived, so fingers crossed that it does ship out soon, because I'm itching to read this book. To go a little bit more in depth into the synopsis, so we have these two students at a private academy, Devon and Tiamaka, who are selected to be part of the senior class prefects. However, after the announcement has been made, someone who goes by Aces begins to send anonymous text messages revealing secrets about these two that kind of turn their lives a little bit upside down. At first it seems like it's just a bit of a sick prank, but it starts to turn into a much more dangerous game. Just so excited to read this. I'm looking up basically right now to see if there's any updates on my tracking, because the website that I ordered from says it's in stock, but I haven't received it yet. So hopefully that means that they'll be able to ship it out this coming week. The most anticipated release for the second half of the year, Broken Web by Laurie M. Lee. This is the sequel to Forest of Souls, which I will actually be talking about in a later question, so I won't dive too deeply into my thoughts on this one. But I think it's safe to say that I did end up enjoying this quite a lot, since the sequel is one of my most anticipated releases for 2021. I'm just very curious to see how things are going to turn out. I need to know more. I cannot wait to get my hands on Broken Web. Biggest disappointment. For this one, I'm going with Wicked As You Wish by Rin Chapeko. Now, I'm not saying that this is a bad book or anything. I think just on a personal level, this wasn't really to my taste. And I thought that I would enjoy it more than I did. So it was kind of sad that I didn't end up loving this one more. And I think the main reason is because this is definitely a mishmash of a lot of fairy tale elements and a modern world setting too. I think just in terms of taste and fantasy, I prefer worlds that are created or a more contemporary setting where there's kind of like a supernatural paranormal underbelly to it, rather than having like the world as we know it with all of these fantasy elements that are out in the open. Like, there are definitely exceptions, I think, in terms of superhero stories. I don't mind that, but with this it just didn't really gel with me, sadly. That being said though, if this is something that sounds like your cup of tea, I would recommend giving it a go, just because the reason why I didn't love it was like a personal taste thing. But to give you a little more of an idea of what this is about, it's described as an alternate history fairy tale series. So there was this magical kingdom of Avalon, which was left desolate and covered in ice by the Snow Queen. The former citizens of Avalon are now refugees and living in like our world. So this is why the Crown Prince is stuck in Arizona. So he's the sole survivor of the royal family, and kind of hope for regaining his homeland comes about when this mythical creature makes an appearance, and the Crown Prince and this girl called Tala, who kind of negates powers, work together along with another kind of ragtag crew to journey back to Avalon. But I will say that it has just a really rich and diverse cast of characters, which I think is really important. I was listening to the audiobook for this as well, which perhaps wasn't the smartest move in terms of reading formats for me personally again, but I did find that I struggled to remember like who was who and what role they played. Biggest surprise. Forest of Souls by Laurie M. Lee. Now this one I was definitely intrigued by. I received it in a book subscription box last year. The synopsis sounded really intriguing because we follow a character who's like training to be a royal spy, which definitely piqued my interest. So I definitely went in expecting to enjoy it, but I was like sucked in from page one. The main character has a really strong narrative voice, and I really enjoyed her as a character, and I became so invested in her story, and I really enjoyed the world building. There was just so much that like took me pleasantly by surprise. So that's why I'm choosing this one for this question. In this one, we are following Saoirse, who is training to become a royal spy, but her plans end up being derailed when she is attacked and her best friend is killed. This brings about a series of events which unveil that she is actually the first soul guide in living memory, and she is summoned to the Spider King's domain, and I just adored this book so much. Battery died. What was I saying? Can't remember, but loved it. So glad I read it. very keen for the sequel. A favorite new author, this can be like a debut author or just a new to me author. I feel like I would have wanted to kind of read multiple books from a particular author that was new to me or a debut before giving a solid answer on this question, but with what I've got, I think I'm gonna say Alex E. Harrow. And that's because I read Once and Future Witches, and one of the things that I fell in love with was the writing style. Did I not tab anything? Oh, I dog-eared pages. Oh no, I did start loosely annotating things, but I vaguely remember being quite annoyed with myself that I didn't do it sooner, just because of how rich and descriptive and atmospheric the writing was. This was just such a beautiful book. There were little interludes with fairy tales and stories that were slotted in at various points throughout the story that kind of metaphorically or a little more directly related to what was happening in the story. It was lovely. Also read this for my book club, so if you want to know a little bit more on what I thought as well as some of the other co-hosts, a link to our live show discussion in the description. Newest fictional crush. This one I don't have an answer to, sadly. I find that it's very rare for me to develop a fictional crush on a character. More often than not, I'm kind of just rooting for this particular pairing within a book to play out, or I really like that this is the love interest for a partner, but like in the context of the book, so like it works with this character but not necessarily my taste, if that makes sense. So sadly, no answer for this question. Newest favorite character. Okay, I knew as soon as we met Christian Avasarala that she was a new favorite character of mine. Incredible. I'm pretty sure that from what I've annotated so far, all of my favorite tabs are things that Avasarala has said or done. Pretty much. Just so many of her interactions and the things that she does. It's just, she's a very strong character, so blunt, takes nobody's bullshit. She's intelligent and manipulative in all the best ways. I just adore her as a character. She's one of the characters that we meet in the second book in the Expanse series, and I'm very, very excited to see her in the show. I'm gonna wait until I've read a couple more of the books before I start watching the show, I think. But she fast became a favorite character. Everything about her. A book that made me cry. Heartstopper Volume 4 by Alice Oseman. Again, I showed my live reactions to this book in a recent vlog. It might have actually been the same vlog where I read Cemetery Boys. Was it? I think this is my favorite, if not one of my favorites of the Heartstopper series so far. It's definitely emotional. There are some really wonderful light moments, but it can also be quite intense too. Definitely some trigger warnings in terms of like mental health and eating disorders. I'll have a link in the description to where you can see a full list of trigger warnings if you want to know a little bit more, but it's definitely a series I would recommend. Absolutely beautiful. We love the relationship, the care and love. It was an emotional time. Absolutely. A book that made me happy. Felix Ever After by Case and Calendar. I'm not going to go into any detail about why exactly, but there's just one scene in particular that made my heart soar, and I was very happy to see it. I will say though that there were definitely some like not so happy moments for sure, and I think that'll become evident when I touch upon what the book is about in the synopsis a little bit, but like one scene in particular, just perfection and beautiful. All of the happiness. So Felix Ever After follows Felix, who is black, queer, transgender, and has never been in love. And then he starts to receive some anonymous messages, some very transphobic messages. And this anonymous person also publicly dead names Felix and shares some photos of Felix from before he transitioned. So he starts to plot the perfect revenge plan. This perfectly describes what happens next. What he didn't count on, his catfish scenario landing him in a quasi-love triangle. There's a lot that happens in this. Some kind of more intense and devastating and just really hard to read parts, but also some really wholesome and happy moments too. The most beautiful book I've bought or received so far. Cheating slightly, but it makes sense. The Ember Quartet by Saba Tahir. And the reason is because obviously I bought like this special edition collection of the whole series, so that are all beautiful and matching. Look at the sprayed edges. Look at the details. The covers as well. The foiling. Oh, the foil details on the actual hardcover. Yes. Like, yes please. Definitely the most beautiful books I've added to my collection. I love it. The books that I want to read by the end of the year. There are many, but some of the books that are kind of at the top of my TBR pile is a reread of The Obelisk Gate by N.K. Jemisin. I've just reread the 5th season. I haven't yet read the 3rd book in the series, but I think it's safe to say that the Broken Earth trilogy is one of my favorites of all time. I can't say how much I adore this series enough, but I recently reread the 5th season because my book club decided to read it. It's definitely a book that is worth reading multiple times. There's a lot to explore, there's a lot to learn and unravel, and then revisiting the story after knowing a lot of it makes for a very interesting time. So I'm keen to reread book 2 so that I can then read the 3rd and final book in the series, The Stone Sky, this year. It's gonna happen. If you haven't read the Broken Earth trilogy, please do. Though again, there are some intense triggers in this series, so be sure to check out the link in the description if you wanted to just take a look at that before jumping in. Oh, it's everything though. Everything about it is fascinating and unique. Such an interesting and rich world. And it's basically set during the start of the end of the world. But the main character is also dealing with the murder of her young son and the disappearance of her daughter, whilst everything is crumbling around her. Perfection, utter perfection. I also need to read books 2 and 3 in the Mistborn trilogy, the first era. I have already started Well of Ascension, but we'll be completing this because then I need to read Rhythm of War. I'm way overdue in reading this. I'd hoped to finish it so much sooner because I was sent this review copy and I was planning to read it at the end of last year, if not early this year, but life happened. I also then decided to finish the Mistborn trilogy before getting into this one because of the Cosmere links. The last book on my very long list is Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, an absolute favourite. I also really enjoyed Daisy Jones and the Six, and this book is one of my most anticipated releases of 2021, so I would very much like to get to this ASAP. But that concludes my mid-year book freakout tag for 2021. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you have done this tag, I'd love to see it, so feel free to link it, your video, your blog post or whatever, in the description below. Otherwise, I'd love to hear about some of the best and worst books that you've read in 2021 so far. But that's all that I have for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you very soon, but until then, I'll talk to you in the comments. Bye!